So the webinar is also mainstreaming on our Discussants Center for Asian Blossoming. So I requested us. Thank you so much, Dr. Devendra, and thank you all of respected participants for your kind attention. Uh, uh, Namaste and a very good evening to all of you. I welcome you all to the Swadhyay Sahachakra dialogue. It is a glorious movement to extend my warm wishes on behalf of the School of Humanities and Social Sciences of Raffles University, Swadhyay Sahachakra, Circle for Creative Co-Learning, Viswanidhan Center for Asian Blossoming, Puducherry, Chennai, and Rage Global Foundation. It is my pleasure to invite all the esteemed panelists, academicians, researchers, and knowledge seekers. It is an honor and privilege to have available with us our distinguished speaker and respected discussants. Professor Anand Kumar, former president of Indian Sociological Society and former professor of JNU. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. We are also joined by Professor Ajit Kumar Pandey, sir, from Department of Sociology, Banaras Hindu University. We welcome Professor Anand Kumar Giri, sir, Madras Institute of Development Studies, Chennai. We also welcome Dr. Saji Verghese from Department of Philosophy, Legitimacy College, Shillong. I extend my warm welcome to Honorable Justice Meena Vigombar, former Chief Justice of Rajasthan High Court, Honorable Vice Chancellor of Raffles University, Dr. Divakar Kohli, and all the respected participants, viewers, listeners, and knowledge seekers. Thank you so much for joining us. Let me give a brief introduction to our Swadhyay Sahachakra, Circle for Creative Co-Learning and Mutual Studies. It is an initiative of studying and learning together self, culture, society, and the world. Friends associated with this are eager to walk and mediate with new horizons of thinking, new movements of social and cultural change at work in our contemporary world. We study seekers such as Sri Aurobindo, Mahatma Gandhi, Chitranjan Das, a seeker and creative thinker from Odisha, and many others from around the world. We also present our own writings and reflect upon our creativity together. We also invite seekers from different fields of life to share us with their life's vision, sadhana, and a struggle for creating a world of beauty, dignity, and dialogue. We meet every Sunday and sometimes on Wednesday. Now we are nurturing this dialogue in collaboration with School of Humanities and Social Sciences of Raffles University and Raise Global Foundation, USA. We are having very great speakers today, and we have a very interesting topic of discussion, because both Gandhi and Gramsci are remembered as great thinkers who have both expert as well as activist knowledge. Both ideas give us intellectual ability to interpret and understand reality. We live in a time where ruling elite and political elite through cultural industry and mass culture manipulate our understanding of reality to promote their interests, that is anti-subaltern interest. People do not see things as what it is, but as it is interpreted for them. Hypernationalism, fascism, celebration of mystical past, Suppression of dissents, and new liberal capitalism have become hallmarks of today's time. Gramsci concepts such as subalternity, intellectual, and common sense are keys concepts to understand today's time as well as may help us in overcome our intellectual backwardness. Gandhi as well as Gramsci praxeology have become more important than ever. Non-bourgeois conception of progress and Sarvodaya have become means and ends of today's time, and it is very significant to discuss both ideas. With this small introduction, now I would like to invite Professor Anand Kumar Giri sir to kindly moderate the session by introducing the theme of today's topic, Gandhi and Gramsci. Sir, over to you.
Thank you so much, dear Randhir, and a warm welcome to Professor Anand Kumar, Professor Ajit Pandey, and Dr. Saji Verghese, and all friends co-present, Osman, Sandhyapa, Minati, and all friends. It's a joy to be together. And has Professor Anand Kumar joined? I had sent him the link, Randhir.
Yes, no, he hasn't joined.
Can you please call him again, just to
Okay,
make
okay,
sure that
okay,
he
okay,
has
I've
got.
got. Okay.
And you can also send the link through WhatsApp and kindly call him as an
Yes,
initiative.
I have already sent the link. I'm calling you.
So, dear friends, it is a joy to be together today. And today is August 1, and this is also the beginning of our month of freedom in a very limited sense. And 15th of August, which is the day of our national independence, it is also the day of birthday of Sri Aurobindo, who also articulated that struggle for freedom. Both Gandhi and Gramsci and many friends co-present, those who are not within the university system, may not have learned heard much about Gramsci. Gramsci, Antonio Gramsci, he was born in Italy on 22nd January 1891, and he breathed his last in Italian prison. He was arrested by then Italian fascist dictator Benito Mussolini, and he died in the prison in very difficult circumstances. His friend, the great economist Pierre Sraffa, who taught at Cambridge and who also was from Italy, he as well as Gramsci's sister, they campaigned for his release, but his health had deteriorated in a way, so he was kind of killed in the prison. And this condition of prison and imprisonment reminds us the situation in which we are today. As Randhir was linking the contemporary condition, that in the contemporary condition of unfreedom, of imprisonment, and here let us also remember Father Stan Swami. You know who Father Stan Swami is. And Father Stan Swami's statement was that even the caged parrot can sing, even the caged bird can sing. And what Gramsci did, and you know Father um, Stan Swami and many others, who are now imprisoned in the so-called Bhima Koregaon case. It is like a sprawling case. It's, if you look at what is happening to our country and the world, it starts and then you just pick up people whom you do not like and then put them into this Bhima Koregaon case, and so, and then Father Stan Swami, who in a Gramsci-like situation, he was staying in a one-bedroom apartment and he gave his whole life to the freedom of the marginalized. And his death, his murder in the prison, it resonates with the death and murder of Antonio Gramsci. And but being in the prison, Gramsci wrote very, very deep thoughts. His prison notebooks constitute very important elements of critical social and political thinking. And there he developed many important ideas, the notion of hegemony, the idea of the organic intellectuals, and the whole idea of the subaltern, and many others which have had profound influence. And Gandhi was also in the prison. And as you know, that Gandhi was also imprisoned first in the sedition case, and then he was put in prison several times. And he has also written very profound thoughts from the prison, like when he was in the Yervada prison in Pune. So from Yervada, he has a very important set of thoughts. So it would be very interesting to read the prison notebooks of both Gandhi and Gramsci. And there are also many other deeply inviting challenges, both from Gandhi and Gramsci. And today, as in a different historical time, as we are confronted still the challenge of emancipation, the problem of poverty, the problem of centralization, the problem of language, the problem of knowing how do we know, we can learn a lot by engaging simultaneously Gandhi and Gramsci. But unfortunately, this simultaneous engagement has not yet happened in our intellectual and other uh, journey. So this is an humble effort in this direction, and we hope with our dialogue we will plant seeds for working more in this field. With this, I take the opportunity to share the screen, please. Can you enable me to share the screen, Devendra and Randhir?
Yes, sir, you can share.
So, the vision and practice of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi calls for new initiatives in thinking, actions, and transformative border crossing dialogues. It is in this spirit that we can carry out a dialogue across the works and legacies of Gandhi and Gramsci. Both Gandhi and Gramsci worked and died for true national liberation and human emancipation. Both of them strove for people's development and freedom. Gramsci spoke about realization of hegemony of the subaltern classes, not through one-sided class hegemony, but through processes of popular consciousness building and raising of consciousness, also through popular education. Gandhi also challenged to bring many different classes, castes, genders, and religions together through processes of emancipatory consensus building and transformation. So I explore possibilities for recovering alternative ontologies and epistemologies from Gandhi and Gramsci for our contemporary times, especially in terms of overcoming the gaps between the sovereigns and the subaltern. I explore how popular consensus building across class, caste, gender, and religious divides calls for new initiatives in non-duality and Advaita. Gandhi's vision and practice was nurtured by an open Advaita without boundaries, and I explore how such an Advaita or non-duality is important for realizing the vision and practices of Gramsci and the potential of his legacies. We need to bring together the legacies of Gandhi and Gramsci together to fight against the rising fascist forces in India, USS, and around the world, which in a conscious or unconscious manner continue the annihilationist legacies of Hitler and the whole Nazi and fascist project. Then we can here bring Hitler to our conversation. Gramsci fought against Italian fascism led by Mussolini. Mussolini then aligned with Hitler, and Hitler created a machinery of war and annihilation, including annihilating millions of Jews. Gandhi and Gramsci. We know that Gramsci offered this notion of organic intellectual, and organic intellectuals who are working in continuous conversation and collaboration with their social background, for example, the working class background. And here, Gramsci's idea of the common sense is very interesting. Here, common sense is a kind of sense that exists in a social and cultural setting. But Gramsci here puts a very interesting idea how organic intellectuals working with working class, for example, can engaging with the common sense, they can transform it into Gramsci's word, the good sense. Therefore, the leadership position, a kind of the moral and spiritual leadership position. And that also resonates with the Gandhi's idea that a satyagrahi or a worker with the people. So in dialogue with the people, we do not have to accept everything that the people say. And that common sense has to be transformed into the good sense, because sometimes there are many elements in the common sense that defy a sense of dignity, like untouchability, for example, or untouchability and caste domination. Gandhi, beginning with the critique of untouchability, later transformed that into critique of a very foundational critique of caste domination, where he said that the problem of the caste can only be solved, for example, along with many things, through intercaste marriage, which is a profound, you know, interrogation of the logic of caste separation. Now, Gramsci on intellectuals. The problem of creating a new stratum of intellectuals consists therefore in the critical elaboration of intellectual activity that exists in everyone at a certain degree of development, modifying its relationship with muscular nervous efforts towards a new equilibrium, and ensuring that the muscular nervous effort itself, in so far as it is an element of a general practical activity which is perpetually innovating the physical and social world, becomes the foundation of a new and integral conception of the world. The traditional and vulgarized type of intellectual is given by the man of letters, the philosopher, the artist. Therefore, journalists who claim to be men of letters, philosophers, artists also regard themselves as true intellectuals. In the modern world, technical education, closely bound to industrial labor, even at the most primitive and unqualified level, must form the basis of the new type intellectual. So on this basis, the weekly Audi Nouveau worked to develop certain forms of new intellectualism and to determine its new concept. And this was not the least of the reasons for its success. The mode of being of the new intellectual can no longer consist in eloquence, which is an exterior and momentary mover of feelings and passions, but in active participation in practical life. And I want to suggest that this notion of Gandhi's Gramsci's intellectual as an active participant in practical life, it resonates with the Gandhi's notion of the intellectual and intellectual activity. And as constructor, organizer, permanent persuader, and not just a simple orator. And we know, speaking about that, being an orator, intellectual, and a thinker, Gandhi was not a very good orator, you know. If you look at Gandhi was, when he was started, he was kind of stammering. And so therefore, oratory, and when Gandhi says that my life is my message in the sense that, and that my message emerges from my emergence in activities, especially practical activities. From technique as work, one proceeds to technique as science and to the humanistic conception of history, without which one remains specialized and does not become directive. So Gramsci's notion of intellectual, therefore, has very interesting points which can meet the vision and practice of Gandhi. And here I also want to bring the whole epistemic dimension, the modality of knowing in this sense. Thinking in a Gramscian way, in an article that I just read, the author writes, the intellectual's error consists in believing that one can know without understanding and even more without feeling and being impatient. In other words, that the intellectual can be an intellectual and not a pure pedant if distinct and separate from the nation people. That is, without feeling the elementary passions of the people, understanding them, and therefore explaining and justify them in the particular historical situation, and connecting them directly to the laws of history and to a superior conception of the world, scientifically and coherently elaborated, that is knowledge. Therefore, here Gramsci is bringing that to know is that we would have to bring our intellect and our passion and feeling together. So a kind of an integral way of knowing, which then corresponds to Gandhi's way and of knowing with our heart, hand, and head. In this excerpt, Gramsci outlines his epistemological sense, which is consistent with qualitative methodologies. Knowledge in this view emerges from the combined endeavors of intellect, emotion, and engagement with the people. Whereas Western traditions emphasize intellect as the producer of knowledge, Gramsci includes feeling and experience in his definition. For Gramsci, knowledge is also based in the concrete rather than the abstract, and is developed in a social context. And there are very interesting reflections on Gandhi's method also. And here we may remember a very important paper in this field by Professor Amrit Srinivasan, who has written about Gandhi and field work, for example. And so here, Gramsci's method, as this writer is saying, it has a qualitative dimension, and Gandhi's method, as reflected upon by anthropologists like Professor Amrit Srinivasan, can be brought together. Then organic intellectual, as I have suggested, therefore, it's a way of bringing head and heart together. Gramsci's project of education of masses and Gandhi's project of learning with the masses. And one important pedagogic dimension here is learning to learn from below, the whole subaltern pedagogy that Gandhi develops, and later on Gayatri Chakrabarti Spivak, she also builds on that. And organic intellectual as persuaders, that is very interesting, persuasion. And we know these two processes, force and persuasion. Now, there is a very important democratic dimension in Gandhi and Gramsci. Later on, I would elaborate that how Gramsci was a critic of the bureaucratization of life, though he acknowledged, like Weber, a bit of indispensability of bureaucracy in modern social organization. But Gramsci was for democracy. And that element of democracy was persuasion. And here the democratic project also can be traced back to pioneers like Abraham Lincoln in the USA, who in a similar context, he fought the Civil War for emancipation of the slaves and for the enslaved humanity. And what we find here in Abraham Lincoln, in a way, we refer to Chittaranjan Das. And once Chittaranjan Das, Chittavai was telling me in a speech was saying that the president to Gandhi is Abraham Lincoln. Because what Lincoln was doing, Lincoln was engaged with persuasion, the rhetorics, the way of the speech, using the way of the speech to really create bridges, a kind of creative consensus building. So coming back to persuaders, if organic intellectuals are persuaders, then these persuaders become exemplars, and they persuade by becoming exemplars. And here, a very interesting thought that has emerged from engagement with Gandhi is that the whole Gandhian way of being is a way of being an exemplar. How do I persuade you? I persuade you by becoming an example, and not just with all the force and power, the violence that I have. The distinction between ideologue and exemplar was articulated 25 years ago by the great political scientist and theorist K. Raghavendra Rao from Karnataka. In 1996, I was nurturing an international seminar on social criticism, cultural creativity, and the contemporary dialectics of transformations with the silver jubilee of our institute, Madras Institute of Development Studies, which brought Professor Raghavendra Rao, Chittavai, and also the great political thinker and philosopher Fred Dallmayr and many others together. And in this seminar, which then was published in the book I have edited, Professor Raghavendra Rao, he brought the idea of the ideologues and exemplars. So my point is that the real challenge of Gandhi and Gramsci is that as we are engaged with the work of persuasion, the challenge is how do we become exemplar? And Akhil Bilgram's reflection on Gandhi when he talks about Gandhi's integrity also brings that point of view. And I want to suggest therefore that if organic intellectual is a persuader, and that persuader also becomes a satyagrahi. And one possible point of dialogue now that we can work further with both Gandhi and Gramsci, that how do we, how do we bring the vision and practice of organic intellectual and the vision and practice of satyagrahi together? Can we envision and practice the organic intellectual also as a satyagrahi? Then hegemony and consensus building. Hegemony is a consciousness work and persuasion. And Ranjit Guha talks about dominance without hegemony. Ranjit Guha's work on Gramsci in India and Guha's reflection on Gramsci and Gandhi. I think Guha has done a little bit of work in this field, and that constitutes a very important source of inspiration for our current and further work. Ranajit Guha writes, or his thought is like this: British imperialism was no democracy. It was an autocracy, a state that had no citizens but only subjects, a dominance without hegemony as we have defined it. It was a measure of the success of imperial policy that it has managed so well to hide this elementary truth even from the most enlightened Indian liberals for so long. When the velvet groves were taken off, suddenly exposing the iron fist, the victims woke up from the trance to realize that in a land occupied, exploited, and ruled by a modern imperialistic power, the only equality recognized by the rulers was the common subalternity of the entire people subjugated by it. The liberal nationalists, on their part, used this very common subalternity to mobilize the people in an anti-imperialistic struggle over Gandhi's leadership. He insisted on keeping this struggle absolutely united and opposed to any form of class conflict, and he considered to be divisive. But that also again poses the question, because the consciousness building is not just hegemony but also counter hegemony. And of course, one important challenge with India's freedom struggle, as it was nurtured by Gandhi, was that Gandhi, for some reason, he was silent on many issues. For example, the question of oppression in the princely states of India. I come from Odisha, where many princely states just next door, and in our meeting here we have Minati who comes from Nilagiri, and the king of Nilagiri, the princely state of Nilagiri, and I think Minati's grandfather was had experienced that. So these princely states, the kind and the peasant struggle in the princely states. In Odisha, for example, the peasant struggle in the princely states. And it seems that Gandhi was not totally supportive in the sense that the political solidarity of Congress with peasant movements against the rural in the princely states was not totally, conspicuous, and therefore a dialogue with Gramsci and Gandhi now is that how do we really, while working towards building a consensus from all fronts, how can we really keep alive or respond to the challenge of counter hegemony? That is very essential for struggle for freedom. I would skip further elaboration of this and then come to this point about Gramsci. And of course, I want to emphasize the point of the counter hegemony, because this uh, Gramsci is talking about not only hegemony but also counter hegemony. And that counter hegemony, I want to suggest that counter hegemony resonates with the idea of satyagraha. Though the historical satyagraha in Gandhi might have been shaped by particular forces, but today we can bring counter hegemony. One way of being counter hegemonic is to be satyagraha. And that counter hegemony and resistance also, the way Michael Foucault has developed. So there is a possibility of bringing Gramsci, Gandhi, and Foucault together with this notion of counter hegemony, resistance, and satyagraha. Gayatri Chakrabarti Spivak, in her much talked about essay, talks about can the subaltern speak? And here she is engaged with very interesting conversations that how in condition of subalternity I can speak. It is not just a very simplistic thing that they cannot speak, but what kind of speech that we can give. To this, I would like to add, can the subaltern meditate? Meditate in multiple sense. For example, I am meditating how to be counter-hegemonic. I may not speak, but I can still meditate. Meditate in its multiple sense, even meditate how to resist. And also, can the subaltern pray? Prayer as a mode of being. I think there, if prayer is a very important way of energizing subjectivity, then very interesting dialogue can happen between Gramsci and Gandhi. And with my limited knowledge of Gramsci, I think coming from Italy, Gandhi was, Gramsci was engaged with the whole notion of popular religiosity, including possible spiritual dimension of popular religiosity. And Gandhi, Gramsci, rethinking and transforming the epistemic and the ontological. Gramsci and epistemology. Practical epistemology of Gramsci, as I have suggested, that Gramsci's way of knowing emerges from being engaged with practical activity, therefore praxis. And of course, Gramsci from the Marxist tradition, he embodied a philosophy of praxis. But that practical epistemology has post-positivist dimension. It is not just positivistic. Then the ontological aspect of Gramsci and Gramsci's conception of the world. Now, this particular writer, Joel Wenenite, in his essay on Gramsci's conception of the world, he writes, through conceptions of the world, we see Gramsci groping for an ontological register in which to explain communism as a fundamental transformational questioning of one's being in the world, one's relationship to the other. Conceptions of the world, therefore, should be seen as central to Gramsci's political philosophy and his celebrated worldliness. Gramsci never aspired to the privileged position of the objective. And this is again very important that as I mentioned, that the way of knowing is to be involved with the activity and not to stand apart. And by standing apart, we claim that we are objective. Then this idea I want to bring here, the notion of epistemic violence, or a way of knowing, where it can really keep violence within. Gayatri Chakrabarti Spivak's concept of epistemic violence resonates specifically with Gramsci's notes concerning the ways that the hegemonic ideology blocks development of the authentic experiential knowledge generated by subaltern classes' everyday life. Gramsci argues that the workers' direct experience and their ideologically inherited common sense comprises a contradictory consciousness. That is, their lived experience of exploitation is blocked from development by the hegemonic ideology that denies exploitation. This contradictory situation influences moral conduct and the direction of will in a way that does not permit of any action, any decision or choice, and produces a condition of moral and political passivity. Then moving on, I already have pointed to that how we have to look at hegemony, counter hegemony, and the loka sangraha. I want to bring this idea, the idea of loka sangraha, which comes from Bhagavad Gita, where the gathering of people. If hegemony as a way of consensus building, it's a way of gathering of people. And that gathering has dimension of both hegemony and counter hegemony. And at some point, it has to address the challenge of overcoming, as I have suggested, the dualism between the sovereign and the subaltern, and a new kind of Advaita and a new dialectics. And as Gramsci is also grappled with the problem of dialectics and totality, and I'm just coming to a bit, after a minute I'm coming to this, but to bring it into the contemporary moment, we can bring the ideas of Roy Bhaskar, who in his book, A New Dialectics, The Pulse of Freedom, he talks about open totality. And I think Gramsci's notion of dialectics is for an open totality rather than a closed totality, and the dialectics of self-transformation, where persuasion involves both compassion and confrontation. So Professor Anand Kumar is here already, no? Randhir?
Yes,
Professor
yes,
Anand.
I'm listening to you. Very interesting, Dr. Giri. Please carry on.
So Professor Kumar, you may have to, you told that you have to leave by 5 p.m. So
No, I have
can you,
adjusted it to 5:30. My
okay.
friend will G. So please carry on.
So I may take another 5-10 minutes and then we'll listen to
Take
you.
your time. Take your time. It's very interesting.
So then this persuasion has a dimension of both compassion and confrontation. And Gandhi's art of persuasion embodied both compassion and confrontation. In a way, the whole idea of organic intellectual and hegemony and counter hegemony, we can link it to the process of compassion and confrontation. And Gandhi and Gramsci, certain historical issues, Gandhi, Gramsci, and Mussolini, for example. And at some point, because during the early days of Italian fascism, and Mussolini mesmerized many people, and even Gandhi might have one or two lines of praise for Mussolini. And Tagore, of course, was visited the great historian Benedict Croce, and Tagore also had a few lines of praise for Mussolini and Gandhi and Lenin, and how Gramsci's organic intellectual is not just a Leninist vanguard. In Odisha, Gopabandhu Das, around 1919, when the Bolshevik Revolution came about, he wrote an essay on Gandhi and Lenin. And in a discussion, Professor Anand Kumar was quite rightly saying that some reflection has been on Gandhi and Lenin, but very little, almost none, on Gandhi and Gramsci. Now, I wish to bring another aspect of Gramsci is that Gramsci was a linguist, and he talked about living philology, this whole idea of a living language. And he also emphasized on translation. And Gramsci also emphasized the need for learning in our mother languages. Italy at that, he came from Sardinia, and Sardinia itself was a kind of backward region of Italy, and therefore he understood the significance of dignity of culture and language. And that resonates very well with Gandhi's lifelong journey, as you know, that Gandhi, he wrote in his mother language, Gujarati. His most important work, Hind Swaraj, was first written in Gujarati. And he also did translation. And this is about Gramsci's study of language. Gramsci's initial education in linguistics and his break with structuralist theories of language popular at the time indicate a post-structural sensibility. As Yves explained, foreshadowing post-structuralism and other critics of structuralism, Gramsci argued that history and the historical residues within language are fundamental in operations of power, prestige, and hegemony. Gramsci emphasizes that meaning is created by language in its metaphorical development with respect to previous meaning. New meanings replace previous one in a continual process of development. And then discipline. Gramsci speaks the following about discipline, and we have to understand that as the leader of the Italian Communist Party, and Communist Party has its own notion of discipline. Gramsci writes, how should one understand discipline if what is intended by this word is the continuous and permanent relation between rulers and ruled that realizes the collective will? Certainly not like a passive and supine welcoming of orders, not like the mechanical execution of a duty, but rather as a conscious and clear assimilation of orders to be realized. Thus, the discipline does not cancel personality in an organic sense, but only limits the arbitrary and irresponsible impulsivity, not to speak of the illusory vanity of emerging. I want to suggest that Gandhi was also a very devoted person of discipline. And therefore, the Gandhian idea of discipline and Gramsci's idea of discipline, in Gandhi, discipline was part of a sadhana, and therefore philosophy of praxis that can emerge from Gramsci can now invite the idea of discipline as sadhana. And then, of course, the very important issue of state and civil society, and how Gramsci challenged us to understand the limits of state and how state is really swallowing up civil society. In the prison notebooks, Gramsci reflects extensively uh, on this increasingly broad distinction between state conventionally understood as a synonym of political society and civil society. He develops a new and original conception effectively synthesized by the formula of the integral state. The counterpart of this reflection is Gramsci's famous military metaphor of the war of position that describe modern political struggles in opposition to war of movement, that applies mostly to preceding historical epochs, but also to underdeveloped countries such as Russia. An essential part of Gramsci's investigation of the war of position consists in the analysis of social practices and institutions outside the official state apparatus, practices and institutions that belong to the sphere of civil society, but have a strong political influence. That way, in some way, both Gandhi and Gramsci, they challenged us to understand the massive violence that the massive state apparatus does and continue to nurture and develop civil society. I am not I am not speaking more about this idea and just this one. It is not by chance indeed that Gramsci employs here the adjective massive in order to characterize the structure of modern state. By doing this, he established a meaningful connection with his previous dominant use of the term in relation to religious apparatus and their strict relationship with popular masses. I'm skipping this. And how Gramsci, though, uses totality to some extent, but then later on he realizes that how totality becomes really totalitarianism, and he challenges us. Then the whole question of bureaucracy and democracy. First of all, from the summer 1932 onward, the term bureaucratic has to be understood as opposed to democratic. This is the result of Gramsci's reflection on the issue of centralism and the functioning of the political party. In short, a democratic attitude reflects the real relationship among forces and promotes their development and transformation through the passage of hegemony from one social group to another, coherently with the evolution of the political, social, and economic dynamics. The bureaucratic attitude goes in the opposite direction, aiming at the preservation of a given order. So this is again a continued theme, and later on the whole question of centralism and decentralization. And Gramsci, I think, from the Marxist space, he was well aware of the different kind of centralization. He made a distinction between centralization in Germany and France. And he says that how Italian centralization in Italy, is not really emerging from the, from the roots, rather than it is coming from the top. In a way, that also has been the legacy of centralism in France. In fact, one of the integral part of modern freedom is that, as in French Revolution. Now, French Revolution talked about liberty, equality, and fraternity. But who was to execute? A state, and that to the centralized state. So therefore, in Gramsci, there is the suggestion of a critique of the centralization and which really opens up space for decentralization. And another axis of conversation can be between Gandhi, Gramsci, centralization, the limits of centrality, and the need for the flourishing of the decentral in multiple ways. And if today the kind of, and of course, another thing that we can talk about very briefly, and it requires further study. Now, the kind of, if Gramsci's project of critique of domination, for example, to borrow a Marxist phrase, now in Marx, there was a sensitivity to nature, though the dominant Marxist politics, it, it, it remained much more within class politics and therefore nature, but now recent studies show that how Marx was deeply sensitive to the regenerative dimension of nature. Therefore, production and reproduction has to happen by acknowledging the great significance of nature. And today, with all the crises we are going through, that whether Gramsci was also equally sensitive to the significance for being critical of our domination of nature. But Gandhi was, how Gandhi was deeply sensitive to the cry of nature and how do we live a life which is more ecological, nurturing both the people, nature, human beings, as well as non-human beings together. So the whole problem of anthropocentrism, justice, for example, Gandhi says that one of the great challenges is that how we can live justly with all beings. And all beings does not mean only human beings. Today, with the Anthropocene, the climate crisis, and the coronavirus. So what kind of organic intellectuals we need today? And these organic intellectuals who would listen to not only the cry of the working classes, but also the cry of the whole, nature, the burning forest. The burning forest is the trope. Mahabharata, the great battle of Mahabharata starts not only from the question of land, but also from the question of the burning of the forest. As we know, that the burning of the Khandava forest is the original sin. It is the original violence. Even before the unspeakable violence towards Draupadi, who was dragged from her bedroom to the court. And the whole Mahabharata battle happened to give dignity to Draupadi. But what about the burning of the Khandava forest? I have never read even a single poem describing the pain and suffering of all the snakes and the birds. And today what is happening now with the coronavirus and everything, again burning of the forest, burning of the Amazon. So it is in this context that how we can engage with Gandhi and Gramsci, both bring organic intellectuals and the whole challenge of hegemony, counter-hegemony, satyagraha, and have a much more deeper and expanded notion of our suffering, human suffering, as well as natural suffering. With this, so I am grateful to you for your kind listening and for our friends in Odisha. So I could not summarize into Odia. So Professor, I'll do it a little later. Professor Anand Kumar, it's kissed by the call of time. So let us listen to Professor Anand Kumar and then we'll listen to Professor Ajit Pandey and Dr. Saji, please. So Professor Anand Kumar.
Friends, I'm very impressed by this afternoon's presentation by Professor Ananta Giri on Gandhi and Gramsci. Gramsci exploded on the intellectual horizon of Indian social sciences in early 1970s with the publication of English translation of his prison notebooks. He also became an alternative interpreter of reality beyond the great success stories of Russian Revolution and Chinese Revolution, which gave another space, which created another space for those who were engaged in transformational politics, because there was great confusion in the Marxist fraternity in the 70s, where some of the official Marxists, particularly belonging to Communist Party of India tradition, were supporting the regime led by Srimati Indira Gandhi ji. And there was another trend evolving and emerging and expanding, calling itself Marxist and Leninist, around the model of Chinese Revolution, and they were later called Maoists or Naxalites. But somehow, Gandhians did not wake up to this definition of change and reality around Gramscian ideas. Today, Professor Giri's presentation makes us very thankful to him for making us capable of a dialogue between a great tradition of transformational politics emanating from South Africa and reaching the shores of India via Gandhi, the politics of civil disobedience, politics of Swaraj, with politics of emancipatory collective action, sometimes called communism, sometimes called revolution, sometimes called socialism. As you know, it is not necessary to suggest that comparability of Gandhi and Gramsci has certain limitations of time and space and person. Gandhi was born nearly 2 decades before Gramsci and lived for another nearly 11 years after the passing away of Gramsci in jail. Secondly, Gandhi had to face the triangular challenge of racism, imperialism, and colonialism, whereas Gramsci was sandwiched between the challenges of capitalism and fascism. Thirdly, Gandhi did not work within the framework of a pre-existing paradigm of ideas. He did learn a lot in an open-ended manner from Srimad Rajchandra, Leo Tolstoy, Thoreau, and of course, above all, Ruskin. Gramsci is supposed to be a Marxist who had his own differences with the leading lights of Italian communist movement, Togliatti in particular. And in the international movement, he was found to be leaning towards
Sir, kindly unmute yourself. You are muted.
Sorry.
Yes.
What I want to suggest is to follow Professor Anand Giri very seriously, because he has expanded the frame of interpretation and discussion by a very true interdisciplinary exercise. He talks about biographical comparabilities, philosophical comparabilities, political theories, linguistic theories, and above all, politics and sociology of social change. I see 3 significant points of comparison between Gandhi and Gramsci, and they deserve further exploration and excavation. First and foremost, the idea of hegemony. When Gandhi is confronted with injustice, he immediately tries to look at the totality of the situation and then defines the possible frames of counter-hegemonic action, individual as well as collective, in all the three cases. In case of racism in South Africa, in case of imperialism and colonialism in British India, and of course, communalism. In case of Gramsci, he talks about culture of power, which is so important to understand. Culture of power, which means norms, values, institutions, processes, not only control over capital and state authority, but a whole variety of very fine and minor aspects are also included in Gramscian interpretation of dominance and hegemony. And this is a very important innovation or elaboration within the Marxist tradition beyond class theory. Gandhi is very comparable here because he is looking at the frame of hegemony. If you look at Hind Swaraj, if you want to have a complex introduction to Gandhian understanding of philosophy, politics, sociology, and economics of power and domination, or you look at his lecture at the inauguration of Banaras Hindu University in 1916 for a more simplified, down-to-earth understanding of hegemony and how counter-hegemony. What I like to urge Dr. Giri is to go for one more slide in this discussion where ethics of power and power of ethics may be brought together, because Gandhi looks at ethics of power in a very scientific manner, and he mixes no emotions about it. And he says that it is fear and greed together, fear among the masses and greed among the classes, which are at the root of hegemony of colonialism and British Raj, and not the British soldiers and British guns or British machines and British diplomacy. And then he says that there is another frame of power, which is based upon ethics. He says there is a power of ethics which transcends temporal limits of political power, and it is eternal, it is Sanatan. Truth has its own power, and he says that if you are truthful, no power on earth based upon untruth and lies can diminish you. You can kill me, but not my ideas, was his famous challenge to the forces of domination and repression. So there is scope to bring together Gandhian discourse with Gramscian perspective when we try to look at ethics of power and power of ethics, where Gandhi had more time to experiment than Gramsci. But this is where you have a very transformational philosophy, a transformational cosmology, where death, physical, self, material, instrumentation like army, guns, number of people behind you and against you, etc., become nearly inconsequential. Power of ethics, which becomes very sociological also, because ethics is the essence of social being. And this is where, from family to state power, we try to strive to combine ethics and existence. And we know that we cannot have 100% ethical existence, but a better existence is contingent upon more and more ethical conduct, which starts from truthfulness and goes up to non-violence. And there were pre-existing cosmologies good for Gandhi in the Indian discourse, like Jainism and Buddhism, and he drew from them very richly. There was something in Christianity also, the iconic status of Jesus on the cross. And Gandhi thought that that is the best signification of power of ethics, which made the rulers of their time against Jesus Christ like pygmies, people without any capacity, though Jesus was physically tortured and ultimately killed, crucified. But later on, the world followed Jesus and not those brutal and arrogant people in power. Second point of comparability is this whole notion of praxis, which questions the limits of objectivity, because concepts are based upon objective truth. But what is objective? And is objective, as he said, about open-ended totality. Idea has its own limits in terms of transforming reality into experience and then into concepts and then into theories. There's always a deficit of truth between reality, which is ever-changing, impermanent, and theories. And therefore, every theory requires a window to invite new light, new facts, new realities. And Gandhi was very much criticized about lack of a framework. That's why the younger Gandhians or younger nationalists blamed him to be very vague. It ranged from Nehru and Ambedkar to Jayaprakash Narayan. And they said, why don't you simply say that we want freedom, followed by democracy, followed by socialism? And Gandhi used to say that, my dear, I have to still find the real meaning of Swaraj, and then we can go further about democracy, where I have a lot of disagreements with parliamentary democracy, as you all are so fascinated about. I've seen parliamentary democracy from close quarters in Britain and then in South Africa. Don't put all your eggs in that basket and be open-ended through Panchayati Raj or decentralization and many other ideas. And then, of course, socialism. He had his own challenges, or he did not challenge socialists. He welcomed them, but he felt challenged by the idea of socialism. It was so intoxicating, so totalizing, so assuring that there was hardly any space and scope for human agency. So the praxis concept, basically not coming from Gandhi, but a gift of Gramsci, is very converging notion. And I must tell you that in prison notebooks, there is not much reference to Gandhi, but there is one reference where Gramsci himself suggests that Gandhi should be a great teacher about the war of positions. He says that Gandhi has used strategies of war of positions, and we are looking for war of movements, and we blame him that he is not activating class forces, generating class movements, but you are missing the other part of this story where he is very carefully cultivating war of positions by juxtaposing language, spirituality, the Indian way of life, particularly peasant life, the Indian customs, the Indian myths like Prahlad and Satya Harishchandra, and how he is creating a great conflict between the British civilizational discourse or colonial discourse and the Indian national movement. The third, and this is where Champaran is a very important episode in Gandhian story of emerging as mass leader, unparalleled mass leader in Indian history. And there is hardly any Champaran kind of opportunity for Gramsci. And that's like a missing link of comparison. But certainly, Champaran gives you enough space and scope to understand Gandhi's meaning of ideology, idea, concept, and his emphasis and reliance on praxis. Third is the issue of agency. In case of Gandhi, agency is not only with the modern prince, that is the state as conceptualized by Gramsci. Agency is a multidimensional reality where from individual to collective, there are many spaces and moments of agency. So if it is possible, let us have non-cooperation all the way, 1921, and we will get Swaraj in 1 year. But if non-cooperation confronts power of chaos, crowd, and confusion, then retreat back to the agency of individual and stay with yourself and start with yourself, Ekadash Vrat. And you will start evolving. Swaraj is not only a mega macro reality, it is also a minor micro reality. Micro reality at the level of individual, self, and macro reality at the level of civilization or society or nation. So Gandhi's emphasis on agency of individual and agency of party and agency of collective runs very close parallel, in close parallel relations with Gramsci's analysis. Gramsci has not given much attention to the problem of communist cadre, party worker. But Gandhi and Gramsci can be brought together in understanding their allotment of agency in transformational politics. Now I want to come to another part of the story which has been so beautifully narrated by Professor Ananta Giri, and that's where we have limited possibility of comparison. Gandhi and Gramsci both confronted very brutal regimes, but it is very well known that the character of British rule in India and the character of Salazar's fascism in Italy, they were not comparable. There is one small incidence of using Gandhian method against fascism with utter failure. Goa. Goa was that part of India which was under fascist control. And here, experiment of civil disobedience was undertaken in 1946 with Gandhi's approval and Gandhi's involvement. But Indian National Congress and Gandhi both found it necessary to retreat in this confrontation with fascist rule of Portugal over Goa, where Ram Manohar Lohia jumped into the fray and created great excitement in Goa, but they found it very brutal because fascist regime responded to civil disobedience methodology with ferocious brutality. And this is always a big question, that suppose Gandhi was born in Hitler's regime or Mussolini's regime, what would have been his methodology? Because they always say that, oh, British were very liberal and they had a constitutional state, though colonial, and therefore there was enough space to negotiate within the legal frame of colonial rule in India. But I must say that for the comparative study between Gandhi and Gramsci, the failure of Satyagraha in 1946-47 in Goa against fascist Salazar and failure of communist revolutionaries like Gramsci in Italy will make another point of comparison. Now I want to say that there are three areas of differences between Gandhi and Gramsci at the superficial level. I don't know if I had the depth like Professor Anantagiri, I would not have pointed them out, but for Professor Anantagiri and all of you, I can see Ajit Pandey and many other friends in the team, in the audience. One is Gandhi's journey in the spiritual sphere. Gandhi starts with God as truth and ends up with the claim that truth is God. It's a very radical journey from Rama as incarnation of everything great to truth as essence of everything great, including Rama. Second, his insistence on civil disobedience, which is having its own grammar, which is yet to be understood in totality, because Gandhi argues that constructive work is the elementary aspect of civil disobedience. Civil disobedience without creating a network of constructive work activists and agencies, centers and institutions is like trying to lift a spoon with your paralyzed hand. Just like army does drilling for violence on a regular basis, satyagrahis have to be prepared through this drill of constructive work, which is an alternative discourse of power with focus on community building, character building, and nation building. So Gandhi's grammar of transformational politics, which is essentialized as constructive work and civil disobedience, and they are together, their togetherness is not much highlighted, because in post-Gandhian years, the practitioners of constructive work went far away from civil disobedience, and practitioners of civil disobedience had little time and patience for constructive work. I'm referring to politics of Sarvodaya, which was minus satyagraha, and politics of democratic socialists, which was mostly minus constructive work. So that's one point of very important distinction between Gandhian and Gramscian code of conduct and code of politics for transformation. The second one, as I said, was around religion and God. Gandhi was very deeply believer of God and also reincarnation, and that makes the whole battle beyond time. Not if not in this life, next life. 7 जन्म तुम्हारा पीछा नहीं छोड़ेंगे. तुम किस चक्कर में पड़े हो कि तुम हमको जेल में बंद करोगे, गोली मार दोगे तो हम खत्म हो जाएंगे? No, no, no. Idea will get reincarnated again, and this janam punarjanma siddhant was not negotiable for Gandhi. Whereas this is not finding much space in Gramscian discourse. And then finally, industrialization. Gandhi is vehemently dismissive of the future of industrial civilization, and Gramsci has little time to interrogate the tragedy of industrialization. He is, of course, totally opposed to the capitalist version of industrialization. But what about beyond? And that's where he is very fascinated by the Russian success stories. He is with Bolshevik Party, he is with Lenin, and that's where we have a gray area of comparability. But to end, I must confess that today was a very important day for my own understanding of Gandhi and Gramsci, because Professor Anand Giri took every care to present a very bold thesis or a very bold proposition for all of us. I congratulate him for this courage of conviction, and I thank him and all of you for allowing me to share some of my thoughts with you about this very pregnant frame of analysis, out of which a lot of very useful ideas can come for use by people who are engaged in politics of resistance and who are slipping into domains of unfreedom all over the world, including our own unfortunate country. Thank you, my dear. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Anand Kumar. This is such a deep and journey of co-thinking. We are deeply grateful to you. And just one or two thoughts. Another thought I failed to mention is Gramsci's much inspiring thought, the pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will, which again creates very interesting bridge between Gandhi and Gramsci. But Gramsci himself said that he got this idea from Roma Rolla. So to explore that genealogy of pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will, which also is today's challenge. So we can draw on the genealogies of Romarola and Romarola dialogue between Gandhi and Romarola, for example. And where did Romarola get his inspiration? Romarola drew, among others, from Tolstoy. So these are very interesting circles which building on that, we can nurture this idea of pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will now. And a very deeply provocative question that you have posed, the failure of Satyagraha in Goa, also reminds me another question that Yasin Malik had posed. I think all of us know who is Yasin Malik and the courageous, fighter from Kashmir. And in 2004, in World Social Forum, I was present there, and he asked this question. Now, the space that the Britishers gave to Gandhi, have Indian establishment given the same space to leaders of Kashmir? So it is not only the question of fascist Goa or Hitler's Germany, but if we look at post-independent India, what kind of space that Indian state has given to Satyagraha struggle, whether it is in Nagaland or Kashmir. If we look at initially, they have been non-violent struggles. So, but about non-violent struggle in Nazism, there is also one story which most of the time is ignored, is that even in Berlin itself, the wives of the Jewish husbands, and they were German wives of the Jewish husbands, when their Jewish husbands were taken away, the German wives, and this was the only case of non-violent struggle, they came, and the regime had to give back, give back these wives their husbands. So, so with this complexity and with gratitude, so and
Thank you
we
very
would.
much. I am very happy that you brought the reference of Roma Rolla because Gramsci wrote a book about Roma Rolla and Roma Rolla wrote a book about Gandhi. So you can see the significance of intellectual significance of Roma Rolla in the eyes of Gramsci. And that book deserves to be read very carefully and closely. I don't have access to its English translation. But why a man of the stature of Gramsci thought it appropriate to write a book about Roma Rolla, and why Roma Rolla found it very gratifying to write biography of Gandhi to introduce him and his ideas to European world. And of course, as you know, that Roma Rolla and Gandhi had great differences about Gandhi meeting Mussolini, and he found it very adventurous and unnecessary exercise on the part of Gandhi. So I'm very happy that Professor Giri, you have invited all of us to apply our mind. At least I feel very invited, and hopefully in a very short span of time, we will like to invite you further after a few weeks or months to make us a little more enlightened about this comparability of two great sources of modern ideas and modern practices. Thank you, my dear. Now I have to beg for your permission because of this other engagement. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Anand. So now, with gratitude to Professor Anand Kumar and with joy, so I invite Professor Ajit Pandey, please.
Sir, please unmute yourself. Ajit Pandey, sir, please unmute yourself.
Me? Hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, please. Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Giri and Dr. Randhir Saab, uh, for inviting me for this discussion. I've listened to Professor Giri Saab, Anand Giri Saab, and Professor Anand Kumar. And after listening to both of you, it appears to me that nothing is left for discussions. However, I'd like to recollect some of the significant points in reference to both Gramsci and Gandhi. I'd like to bring back home here within the shortest possible period of time to all of you. There are value perspectives. Today, we are talking about two theoretical value perspectives for understanding and explaining the social problems that we confront in and day out in the modern life. One is Marxist and another is of Gandhi. Gramsci, to me, appears to be offshoot of uh, Marxist, to some extent, Marxist ideas or ideology, whatever you may speak of. So I'd like to dwell upon for some few minutes on Marx's work, and then I'll switch over to Gramsci and then finally Gandhi. And in the end, I'd like to refer to you one of the finest articles published in 1970s or 80s. I don't remember exactly. This is by Mr. Anand Kumar Sen on the Gandhian experiment in Ahmedabad towards a Gramscian reading. This is in regards to a team. So I'll also refer to this essay or this article by Anup Sen in course of our discussions, where Gandhi is regarded to be the great follower of perhaps the spokespersons of Britishers other than period of time. Now we are talking about Marx and Gandhi, Marxian and Gandhian perspective. While if you look at the Marxist work, right from beginning, these all works have exercised great and lasting influence upon the development of social science theory. And this influence has been rather disjointed, sorry to speak, and haphazard as a result of distinctive manner of appropriation of Marx's ideas by successive social theorists. Gramsci is one of them, that I'll be back to him very shortly. The very theoretical complexity of Marx's sociological system, as well as its fragmented state of presentation, has made the piecemeal appropriation of various elements of the system of scholars, particularly inevitable to all of us and to all of the situations. Practically inevitable and that we confront. Now, in this way, Marxian impact has been strongest in certain particular areas of our inquiry, particularly sociological inquiry, such as the study of ideology, social classes, and the entire body of literature on alienation and subordinity. Exactly in the case of Gramsci, that as I spoke to you, that I'll come later. Yet, valuable as well as this work has been, and as fruitful as each of these individual elements of Marxian thought has proved to be, together but they fail to deal adequately with the construction of Marxist thought in real sense of terminology. I don't know to what extent, insofar as the general social theory is concerned, I'm correct. Thus, among social scientists, there has been no adequate discussion of social central aspects of Marxist sociology or social science as his methodology of theory construction. His solution of the crucial problem of historical periodization and the central organization tool of his social theory. Here I like to focus on the abstract model of the social formation, the mode of production, etc. The absence of any some disciplines within Western social science corresponding to central problematics within Marxist thought has led to the virtual neglect by social scientists of significant portions of Marxist theory. And this is what Professor Anand Kumar was trying to refer to, the limitations of Gramsci's theoretical formulations. The larger consequences of this failure has been the distortion of other elements of the theory and a more general misunderstanding of Marxist theory. Thus, Marx's work to me has been viewed, and we may view as an idealistic religion of revolution, a mystical Hegelian dialectic, a philosophical and ethical humanism, and also an appeal to the basest instincts of men, a technological determinism or an economic determinism that we are in fashion of speaking time and again. On the other hand, these distortions and misunderstandings have not been corrected to any extent by theoretical doctrines of Marxist Leninists or other such orthodox Marxism in which theoretical is a party or a state. Yet Marx's work has fared little better at the hands of more dispassionate academic scholars, especially in the Western Europe. Marx's work has been treated as a philosophy that is as a question of dialectics rather than sociology only. And this reduction of Marxism to a dialectical ontology may be broken into three broad categories of interpretations within the literature. But because once again, for the paucity of time, I cannot dwell upon these three aspects. I'd like to center my discussions around Italian Marxist Gramsci, because he's one of the categories, this one of the categories that I'm talking about has been independently and very beautifully explained and extended by this Italian Marxist Gramsci. He characterized Marx's method as one of the determinate abstractions or the use of historically specific theoretical concepts, which are abstracted from empirical, concrete social formation. The concept of hegemony and passive revolution, these are two ideas, and even the common sense, as Professor Giri has been mentioning time and again, from the central, these are the two or three ideas which form the central component in the work of Gramsci, and I will dwell upon that. I'd like to speak something about hegemony. The idea of hegemony, this concept of hegemony forms the, as I spoke to you, the central, the component in Gramsci's, particularly in his influential studies. This is found in the selection from prison notebooks published as far back as 1971. If you look at the earlier works by Gramsci, in his these earlier works, Gramsci applied the term in the sense of building class alliances. But in his later work, hegemony becomes a complete fusion of economic, political, intellectual and moral leadership, which will be brought about by one fundamental group and groups allied to it only through ideology. Further, we can speak that hegemony does not imply mere reciprocity, as many of us have understood, or more, or one-sided domination. Its operation is far more subtle as classes struggle and contest for self-respect and to gain control. Hegemonic class is class that has the ability to articulate the interests of other social groups to its own by means of ideological struggle. And in order to exercise leadership, the class must genuinely concern itself with the interests of those social groups over which it desires to exercise hegemony. In other words, hegemony is construct other groups, but with the consent of different groups. It is the terrain on which ideological struggle takes place. And the notion of tacit consent among the antagonistic classes is perhaps an acknowledgement of the deeply rooted processes of socialization, of power and of indoctrination that characterizes modern capitalistic society. This aspect of hegemony as deeply saturating the consciousness of a society appears to be fundamental in all theorizations of Gramsci's. Hegemony is, if you look into that, if you go for the analysis properly, hegemony is a whole set of practices and expectations, our assignments of energy, our ordinary understanding of the nature of man and of his world. It is a set of meanings and values, which as they are experienced as practices appear as reciprocity, confirming. It thus, in this way, this concept of reality for most people in the society, sense of absolute. And this conceptualization is essential in our society today. With this background of the Gramsci's hegemony, I don't like to explicate more points here because these points are already explained by many more, by Professor Anand Kumar and Professor Giri Sahab. So I'll straight come to some of the salient points of Gandhi, then I'll go for certain comparisons between the two. I'll take a few minutes for the comparison. Gandhi, as a matter of fact, those who are familiar with Gandhi's contributions have to be impressed by the fundamental unity between Gandhi's theory and practice. We have to be also impressed by the exquisite harmony of his life and work, which Professor Anand Kumar beautifully portrayed, which is the very essence of his sincerity. This makes him out as one of the outstanding personalities, not only of our time, but all time to come, all time that we expect even in the future. Now here, I'd like to start with Professor Radhakrishnan, Dr. Radhakrishnan, one of his powerful statements quoted from his book that he has written on Gandhi, that he said that seldom do we find a man very graceful, talented, and same time humanistic in the nature. And those who are having these all features are sure to be great. Gandhi is the recipient of all these qualities, and that's why he calls him as one of the great persons and during his lifetime. My objective in this communication will be threefold. First of all, I'll try to, when I speak of Gandhi, I'll try to draw a rapid outline of the deeper religious aspects of Gandhi's character. The second is the more directly human side of his personality. I'll try to bring into the picture. And thirdly, a brief sketch I'll try to give of what I regard as the two original contributions by Gandhi, which he has made to the process of progress of mankind in the modern age. There are certain cardinal religious virtues whereon Gandhi lays most stress. He holds that through them an abiding work may be done in this world by mortal man in the fear of God. Gramsci appears to be totally silent on this issue. And the first is called Satya, that is the truth. And the second virtue, which has its source in God, is Ahimsa, as Professor Anand Kumar has mentioned. Mahatma Gandhi spends his whole life in exploring the possibilities of this supreme religious duty, that is Ahimsa, and harmonizing it completely with Satya, truthfulness. For Ahimsa does not merely imply to him passive resistance in the face of untruth, but rather it's active condemnation, yet without anger, without any kind of malice or any kind of violence. And the third cardinal virtue on which Gandhi lays the greatest stress is brahmacharya, chastity. And Gramsci is totally silent on that. Once again, I spoke to you that he holds that by a separation of sex function and then its sublimation, a spiritual energy is generated, which becomes a divine power, wonderful it's in its potency. And Professor Giri rightly mentioned that Roma Rolla had described Gandhi as the referred to a book, St. Paul of our own days. Gandhi is St. Paul of our days. This seemed to me to contain an important truth. For Gandhi, like Paul, comes clearly under the category of the twice born among the men of religions. He experiences at a special moment in his life that tremendous convergence of the human spirit, which we may call conversion. Conversion in his early days, he had followed a career at bar as a lawyer with great ardor. Success had been his own ambition. Success in varieties of areas, success in his profession, success in life as a man, and deeper down in his soul, success as a national leader. Now, two things whereby Gandhi's name will live hundreds of years hence. Number one is Khadar program, Khadi's program, and number two is his practice of and these points, Gramsci and Gandhi can never be compared. Gandhi had been the first in this modern age to revive among the agricultural people of the world on a vast scale the practice of village industries. Gandhi had been the first to have burning faith that the revival of cottage industries of all kinds is still possible, whereby the villagers themselves may be saved from moral as well as physical starvations. Now, by his supremely original and personal advocacy of Ahimsa, Gandhi had shown to the world that it is possible today to overcome even the violence of war. It's what Professor Anand, Kumar, and Professor Giri both were mentioning by purely voluntary suffering of corporate moral resistance called Satyagraha. In South Africa, he was successful in this direction. Now his two greatest experiments with truth of Khaddar and Satyagraha have been taken up into the corporate life of mankind, and they have already been put into practice on a scale never known before in the human history. And today we also practice in this way. He has been more than any other personality now living in a herald of peace and goodwill to mankind. I like to also focus on the fact that Gandhi is solitary apostle of the non-violent spirituality in politics and economics. One cannot readily think of another greater or even equal moral force in Indian history since Lord Buddha. And I understand that Gandhi in this respect is far superior at the ontological level to what Gramsci has been talking about in terms of the amelioration of the crisis of the people, suffering masses in the world. Today, Gandhi's personality stands out unique in this sense. And naturally, the admiration with which he has inspired all of us is very great. We feel a great reverences, and this is how Professor Mr. Antonio Gramsci has also mentioned for his quality of tapas, T-A-P-S, his internal fire and fervor, ascetic purity, intensity of aspirations and resolved mortifications and subjugation of the flesh. And this all which is meant by tapas. Such sattvika, refined mortification and subjugation as is known to ancient India and also early and medieval Christian and later Muslims religious traditions, if you read it, because that tapas is ennobled, rationalized, sanctified by single-minded, unremitting employment of the soul force that we call as Atma Bal, won by it to the uplifting of the Indians or to uplifting the human beings. And in this way, we feel very admiration for Gandhi's marvelous political leadership of India. Many of the great stalwarts, even the Marxists, have acknowledged his contributions in the directions. Deep reverence for his ascetic purity and benevolence to all, and admiration as well as reverence for all that astonishing self-control, that deliberate, premeditated, perpetual self-guidance, then dhirata, which compels one to say of all his public actions in all the powerfully dramatic situations, the trials and tribulations, which are always arising around him. His unfailing dignity and courtesy, then response of soul, tireless activity of mind and body in the service of humanity, and particularly in our country, according to his inner lights. There have these have commanded the admiration of his greatest adversaries and often induced them to accede to his wishes, which are not hegemonic in nature, as we have been talking about, as one of the articles I'll very shortly refer to. And I will venture to record some of the critical observations that we must not forget that the Congress ministers are working very hard, were working very hard during that period of time and were making great effort to abolish the drink, evil, and spread literacy, etc. So at this point, I'll elaborate in a few seconds. Uh, I will like to speak that neither Gandhi, this is in reference to Swaraj that Professor Anand Kumar was referring to. If you go to the history, neither Gandhi nor Nehru, nor any member of the High Command at that period of time, nor any other recognized and followed leader of the Congress, except one man, that is C.R. Das, that too for a while, has ever tried to explain to the public what the word Swaraj means. It's very important. Up to 19, if you look at the history up to 1936 and 37, Gandhi tried to say, in effect, when occasion arose, that to him Swaraj meant dominion status. In one of the interviews, he said, I quote his words, I cannot exactly speak where I myself stand on that. In any case, dominion status means an initiative of the British form of the government, which is styled democratic, is at bottom oligarchic, and Gandhi has not expressed his mind about the form of social structure needed by in India other than period of time. Something very important than the mere form of government. On one occasion in Pune, early in 1934, he expressly declined to consider the subject of social structure as being a tall order. Here, I like to position Gramsci. Gramsci's all discussions were around the nature of social structure that then period of time, Italy under the Nazis government was there. But here, this is one of the finest, the academic contributions by Gramsci, much better than what Gandhi was talking about. And Gandhi has indeed repeatedly and frankly said such things as, I am just quoting him, his words. I have no prevision. I see darkness around me. I no longer have that confidence in myself, which I formerly had. If I had a scheme of Swaraj, I would make haste to share it with the public. The future Constituent Assembly elected by people must decide. These are the words of Gandhi. Let the future Constituent Assembly decide whether India should have Swaraj or not. These are the words once again.
Professor Pandey, yeah, it got
I'm sorry,
unmuted.
please. Just I'll try to conclude now. It's contained in his book Hind Swaraj, and it all. I'd like to speak a few lines on Hind Swaraj. It all amounts to this, that all that is characteristic of or peculiar to modern civilization, machinery, railways, etc. Gandhi says are bad and should be given up wholly, not simply reformed, then corrected or regulated, and also apparently by legitimate inference. Much of the ancient Indian civilizations too, he discards, he always stands against. Then finally, he talks of primitive agricultural life should be restored, and that is all that God and nature intended for mankind. But civilization and its arts and sciences are also the products of nature. This is the question. And this is going against what Gandhi was speaking about. This is what I'm talking about, the critical analysis of Gandhi's positions, if I may be permitted for 2 minutes. The misfortune is that as Gandhi has, with all his all disarming sincerity, often frankly confessed, he can only show the way to the truth and the truth itself, but he has he cannot speak, cannot talk of the truth as such. He has not seen the the scene of the truth, the whole truth himself he has not seen. He has not seen the great truth as being perceived by great recesses of Indian society in terms of individual socialism. And these are the the ideas of the recesses the then period of time. The element of truth in Gandhi's Hindu Swaraj is a vague sensing of the fact which is expounded in Upanishads, Gita, Manusmriti. The fact that all separate individuality itself, all this life process is founded upon, has its source in the error, the original sin of the avidya, the identification of identification. Are you? I thought that I have disappeared. Has its error of original sin? As I spoken to avidya, the identification of the infinite spirit with the finite body of flesh and blood and bone, etc. Whence egoism, selfishness, like and dislike, love and hate, also the possibility and fact of altruism, self-denial, philanthropy. All human sorrow, finally, you must give up all joy also and merge back into the total unconscious. That is the supreme principle of consciousness. And mere revisions to the agriculture, as Gandhi talks about, agriculture life will not suffice. You have to revert much further back, and nation as well as individuals have to revert in this way, but in the proper time after having tested all things and held fast by the good. After having equitably discharged their duties to the egoistic as well as altruistic instincts, Gandhi has often equated Swaraj with Ram Raj, again without precise definition. But Ram Raj, if Valmiki is to be believed, was very far from being wholly agricultural. It was largely agriculture, but it was not all villages only. It was highly urban also. Valmiki's description of Ram's Ayodhya is almost gorgeous, though quieter as that of Ravan's golden Lanka, which was predominantly mechanical. I'm happy that my knowledge on Gandhi and Gramsci in the comparative framework has been all, extended. I got a lot of insightful ideas, particularly from Professor Anand Giri, my friend, my senior from Professor Anand Kumar, because I thought to before I plan to speak, I thought of there is no comparison between there are no comparative issues and structures between Gramsci and Gandhi. However, I'm enlightened, and I'll change my perspectives, both on Gramsci, a great liberal Marxist, and Gandhi, a great humanist. Thank you very much. Once again, I express my great gratitude to my friend, Professor Anand Giri, and the convener, to the audience. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Pandey. Thank you. Now, we would listen to Dr. Saji Verghese. And dear friends, we are also by the flow of time. So today we'll go up to 6:30, and at 6:30, dear Randhir, so I am and all friends, I am expected in another dialogue. So we'll continue, and then if we overflow a bit, I would request Randhir, after Saji, Randhir, I request you to speak.
Okay,
And
okay.
then I request Randhir to kindly, help us in coordinating. So now, Saji, please, and you can kindly take, 10 to 15 minutes, please. Saji.
Thank you for inviting me to share some of my thoughts on this wonderfully chosen two great revolutionary thinkers of 20th century. I must confess I'm not a scholar in this field, but I had a wonderful learning experience from three of the great sociologists of contemporary times of India. I would focus on the narrative and epistemological methodologies of dominance and subversion, which continues to live on in social science. For this methodology of dominance and subversion, we are actually thankful to Marxist tradition, the legacy of which continues in Antonio Gramsci. I'm sorry I'm not able to switch on my video because the connectivity being very poor in this region where I live on. So I choose to have only audio. Although these two great practitioners and revolutionary thinkers lived in the 20th century, they have become more than an object of dispassionate study. The intensity of the discussion surrounding their work and activities continue to have a profound effect on the political culture and cultural politics of the post-war scenario. They both lived almost at the same time. Maybe a decade earlier was one born and later the other, but almost at the same time, but in different parts of the world. Gramsci was a devoted Marxist and founder of the Italian Communist Party. He was thus literally a man of action. As an intellectual leader, he participated in the mass proletarian movements during the First World War, and afterwards he involved heavily in Italian politics as a member of PCI. While the focus prior to him in most communist Marxian thinkers concentrated on the state as a center of all powers, Gramsci brought in another important arena, the civil society, which actually shapes the political institution. Gramsci was a journalist, activist, social and political theorist whose writings are heavily concerned with the analysis of popular and elite culture. Power resides in the complex relations of force within society. It is present and observable. It is real. This power is mainly exerted by the dominant bourgeois class through the medium of ideology, by working on the popular mentality via the institutions of civil society, and thus establishing a hegemony using the state apparatus. In Gramsci's conception then, power, ideology, and the philosophy of action, which is popularly called praxis, are inseparable. His impact on social and political thought, critical theory, and literary methodology is profound. He is notable as a highly original thinker within Marxist tradition, especially for his ideas concerning the role of civil society as a linchpin between the economic base and ideological superstructure of society. He is also renowned for his theorization of the importance of cultural hegemony as a non-coercive means of maintaining bourgeoisie's dominance in capitalist societies. A common theme that draws these two thinkers and great practitioners' glossaries on civil resistance, which operates through several mechanisms of change. These are not limited to attempts to appeal to the adversary. They can involve pressure and coercion by increasing the cost to the adversary of pursuing particular policies, weakening the adversary's capacity to pursue a particular policy, or even undermining completely the adversary's sources of legitimacy and power. An aim of many campaigns is to bring about dissension and defections in the adversary's regime and its basis of support. Forms of action can be varied and have included demonstrations, vigils, petitions, strikes, go-slows, and boycotts and sit-ins, occupations, and the creation of parallel institutions of government. Campaigns of civil resistance involve strategy, projecting and directing the movements and elements of a campaign. There is no assumption that I'm sorry, for this pause, there is no assumption that the adversary power against which civil resistance is aimed necessarily avoids resort to violence. Civil resistance has been used in some cases in which the adversary has been predisposed to use violence. Nor is there an assumption that there cannot be various forms of understanding or cooperation between civil resistors and certain governments or other entities with a capacity to use force. Often the reasons for a movement's avoidance of violence are related to the context rather than to any absolute ethical principle. They may spring from a society's traditions of political action, from its experience of war and violence, from legal considerations, from a desire to expose the adversary's violence as unprovoked. The term civil resistance has frequently been used in connection with some types of non-violent campaign. Gandhi used it on many occasions, including in an article in the weekly paper Young India in 1921, one of a series in which he sets out his ideas for resisting British rule in India. One post-Cold War survey of the subject was entitled simply Civil Resistance. Why use the term civil resistance rather than one of its many near synonyms? Civil resistance is one type of the broader overall phenomenon of nonviolent action. Many have seen nonviolent action as the overarching concept, which famously encompasses a vast array of types of activity. Other near synonyms for civil resistance that have been used commonly have included also passive revolution, civil disobedience, and satyagraha. Each of these terms has its own particular uses and connotations. However, civil resistance is the most satisfactory general term to cover the broad range of cases addressed here. Cases were civil in the sense that they had a civic quality relating to the interests and hopes of a society as a whole. In some cases, the action involved was not primarily disobedience, but instead involved supporting the norms of a society against usurpers, and the generally principled avoidance of the use of violence was not doctrinaire. His remarkable Hind Swaraj and his later works in the form of countless dispatches to young India, he seems to be fortifying an India and its young generation, which is neither led by the nationalist modernists nor even completely given to the Western ideologies and practices. Gandhi argued that many of the peasants and artisans who are exploited have nonetheless maintained the traditional ethical outlook of the ancient civilization, which teaches good conduct above all else. They are already passive resistors. They do not know the use of the sword, and they are not frightened by the use of it by the others. This is a quote from Mahatma Gandhi. The fact is, he further writes, in India, the nation at large has generally used passive resistance in all departments of life. This indicates that the rural villages in India had not lost the traditional sense of duty as a guide to action and continued to perform the duties despite being politically being enslaved. Their economic self-reliance is being challenged in the villages, but they enjoy oriented towards dharma or duty. Despite being, while they were well oriented towards dharma, and critic of civil society, in Ranjit Guha's Subaltern Studies number 3, he makes a mention of this. The tension between passive resistance as an ideal that is difficult for any to attain, a route to true self-control and individual freedom, and passive resistance as a way of life. The list of virtues that are required for true passive resistance, as mentioned by Gandhi, include perfect chastity, adopting poverty, following truth, and cultivating fearlessness. Adopting poverty here means self-restraint. While the conditions of passive resistance are opposed to the privileging of material comfort, and thus Gandhi's view of modern civilization, they are not thereby easily accommodated by traditional Indian life, though they may appear less aligned from this standpoint. In Gandhi's view, Indian traditional life provides both.
Hello, Saji. One request, because of challenge of time, I request you to kindly help us with 2 to 3 minutes, please. Then we will continue the discussion. Thank you.
Is an important ideology in the Gramscian scheme of thought. It contains the element of resistance and a need for transformation. Though originally used in the sense of largely opposing the policies of the state in defense of its laws relating to the imposition of economic policies of the fascist regime, it has its relevance not just in socio-political cultural ambience of the society, also the day-to-day family and personal affairs. The most pivotal here is the importance of recognizing what has been broadly referred to as the power of the powerless, the everyday modest expression of volition that often remains anonymous, but whose political impact often transcends individual revolt to transform consciousness and structure purposeful agency. This work emphasized the importance of daily cultural practices, giving flesh and blood to myriad local contexts where peasants, workers, and the disenfranchised infused the soul of popular histories. From this perspective, women and men made their own histories through cultural contestation, even though finding themselves in conditions not of their own making. These perspectives countered an earlier emphasis in agrarian studies on revolution and large-scale collective mobilizations expressing often defiance of state policies. Antonio Gramsci talks about a primitive position of subordination in the case of subaltern to a position of autonomy in its ascent to power, being stopped by dominant social groups or political forces. In order to illustrate this point, we shall paraphrase each step as if it were a stage in development. First, there is a change in economic sphere, such as a change in property relations, which alters the organization of society, relegating a social group to a subordinate social position. Second, the subaltern group either adheres passively or actively to the new dominant political formations, or the group attempts to influence the new formations with its own demands. Third, the dominant social group creates new parties or government programs to maintain control of the subaltern groups. The fourth, the subaltern groups realizes that the new social formation, parties, and the institutions do not account for its needs, so it forms its own organizations such as trade unions. Fifth, the subaltern group organizes a political formation that represents its concern, expresses its autonomy, and its will to participate in the established political framework. An example in this instance would be a political party working within the established political framework. Finally, the subaltern group realizes its interests will not be met within the current socio-political system, so it organizes its own social and political formation that will eventually replace the existing one. An example in this instance would be a revolutionary party that attempts to transform the state and its correlating social relations. Subaltern studies has become a very popular enterprise. The books, the articles claiming to be inspired by Gramsci have been published on the activity and history of subaltern groups in South Asia and also in South America. The current popularity of subaltern analysis stems mostly from Ranjit Guha's Subaltern Studies Collective and Gayatri Chakravarti Sibak's famous article, Can the Subaltern Speak? Professor Kumar Giri had referred to this, which is not only a critique of the method and focus of subaltern studies, but also a critique of the notion of Europe as a subject and political representation in the work of Michael Foucault. Both Guha and Spivak refer to Gramsci's conception of subaltern social groups, but the reference and representations of the concept are limited in scope due to the fact that they rely heavily on the presentation of the notes included in the selections from present notebooks. In the preface to Subaltern Studies 1, number 1, the first volume, Ranjit Guha states that the aim of the collective is to promote a systematic and informed discussion of subaltern themes in the field of South Asian studies, and thus help rectify the elitist bias characteristic of much research and academic work in this particular area. They relate to class, caste, age, gender, and so forth. He defines it as the people of non-elite. In Weberian fashion, he categorizes the elite into three ideal categories: dominant, foreign groups, dominant indigenous groups, and the regional and local groups that act on behalf of the other two groups. It is the task of research, Guha writes, to investigate, identify, and measure the specific nature and degree of the deviation of these elements from the ideal and situated historically. In her critique of Guha's approach to rewriting Indian colonial history from a subaltern perspective, Spivak contends that the idea of defining the subaltern as a difference from the elite and attempting to investigate, identify, and measure the specific is essentialist and taxonomic. The major problem with such a project is that it requires one not only to know the consciousness and position of the subaltern, but also to represent that consciousness is that very unique feature of the individual and his society. This problem is illustrated in the fact that Subalternists rely on British nationalists and colonialist records to research and validate their work. In Spivak's view, the subaltern leave little or no traces of their existence within elite colonial documents. And if the subaltern are represented at all, they are represented as the other within the dominant elite ideology. It is in this sense that the subaltern cannot speak according to.
So dear Saji, I request you to kindly sum up now. Some of these ideas are already presented to us. So with respect, I wish to request
Yes.
you kindly conclude in 1 minute. And then, so I'm grateful to you. We'll have another occasion to
Yes.
have further discussion from you about it. So Saji, please.
Thank you very much.
Saji. Yes. Hello, Saji. Saji. I think, Saji, you have muted yourself.
Sir, please unmute.
And kindly speak your concluding sentence, and
Yes.
then we would pick up the conversation, please. Okay, I think Dr. Saji is coming. So let us hear Gyan Luigi, please. And from now onwards, Randhir, I request
Yes,
you
yes.
to kindly coordinate.
Yes, I will invite respected participants for the inquiry.
And let us hear Gyan Luigi, please.
Can do it.
And, yes. Dr.
Thank
Gyan
you very
Luigi.
much. Thank you very much. Am I audible? I hope
Yes, yes, you are audible.
Yes. Well, I thank you very much. I thank all the organizers, of course, and all the speakers. Well, I would limit my intervention to a note. That is, I think that as regards the difference between the two thinkers, I think that in Gandhi we have a strong ethical and religious, metaphysical foundation. That is, we can see in Gandhi's meditation on Gita the search for a foundation of ethics, both individual ethics and social ethics. That is, Gandhi is searching for the fundaments of the correct behavior and of the correct orientation towards life, both as regards the individual dimension and as regards the individual, the inter-individual dimension. That is the way in which a community can be constructed. And in this sense, it is, in my opinion, very important what Gandhi says about our being and avatars of Atman. Because Gandhi says, in truth, we should comprehend ourselves, arrive at the comprehension, understanding of ourselves, of our own nature, as being all incarnation of Sri Krishna, of avatar of Sri Krishna. And therefore, the foundation of the common comprehension and understanding of ourselves and of each one of us with each other, up to the understanding that in truth there is no enemy. This, in appearance we are different entities, but in truth actually we are only one entity. This is the foundation, the true foundation, which is authentic foundation, which Gandhi is searching on in his 6-month meditation of Gita. And this is the central point which then thereafter will organize his politics. It is in Gandhi I see something that I miss in Gramsci, that is the foundation of the politics in a dimension which is not a political one. It is an ethical one, it is a religious one, it is, so to speak, a metaphysical one. It goes beyond history. It is not an historical dimension, which does not mean that it has no relation with history. It is a dimension which organize history, should organize history, and which is, so to speak, always actual and always it has always a value. This is in my important, excuse me, in my opinion, the strongest difference between the two thinkers. In Gramsci, I see, of course, the attention for the organization of politics, the search for a doctrine which enable us to understand the politics and the relationship within the classes. And of course, there are common points in Gramsci's distinction between the concept of dominion and the concept of direction. This direction is something which goes uh, from the directing class towards also the advantage of the directed people, whereas dominion is only colonialist, is imperialist, and is racist. In Gramsci, we can find some distinction which are not so formal, not exactly so formulated in Gandhi, but which are very, very near, very next to some of Gandhi's formulation. Therefore, there are, of course, contact points. If I should say what is, in my opinion, the greatest difference between the two is this attention of Gandhi for the metaphysical dimension, religious, both religious and metaphysical. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Uh, Respected participants, I can see some of the questions in the chat box itself. I would like to ask these questions to Saji Verghese and Professor Anand Giri, because we don't have Professor Anand Kumar and Professor Pandey. So the first question is asked by Basanti Das. She is asking whether Gandhi is philosophically anarchist, because this sort of understanding also comes from M.N. Srinivas. M.N. Srinivas, he also said Gandhi was a kind of philosophical anarchist, and his idea is a kind of synthesis of the idea of Tolstoy, Ruskin, and Thoreau. So how would you respond on this question? I can see very important comment by Abdul Qadir. So I would like to invite Abdul Qadir, if he can ask the same question that he asked in the chat box.
Thanks a lot. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Please, sir.
Thanks for the organizers, and thanks a lot for the distinguished professors. We have learned a lot today, and I really appreciate.
Sir, please kindly unmute your video so that we can also see you.
I have a sports clothes, so I don't know
Okay,
whether you want to
problem.
see that I have. I'm wearing the sports clothes.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know. Can you see me now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not. Yeah, okay. Anyway, the issue of imprisonment. This kind of Professor Ananta started with Gramsci was in prison and he died there. And sometimes people actually speculate whether this imprisonment is the end station, or obviously we can see that the imprisonment of Gramsci did not let his ideas die. We are still talking about Gramsci, and he has become a global, although he died there. So the self-imprisonment in ourselves is the imprisonment outside or is it inside? I think that dimension is very important. Another dimension which is critical, I think, it is the influence of cosmopolitanism and transnational dimension of both Gandhi and Gramsci. Gandhi has been around in Africa, in Europe, in many places. So he was obviously influenced by the transnational connections and thinking he had. He was deeply engaged in Palestine, for example, issues and the Middle East and Africa. And so he's a global figure. I think in the end, what the distinguished professors were talking about, the organic intellectualism, I don't know whether Professor Ananta can return to that. What I'm concerned is, both Gandhi and Gramsci were from another time of world development. So today we have a different world. We have a social media, where Facebook and Twitter and others, they actually there are powerful mechanisms that decide this kind of manipulative persuasion. I don't know whether we can call. Gramsci talks about persuasion and cultural and identity, but now it has become so fragmented and globalized that Facebook has, for example, more powerful it's more powerful than many other political issues. The final I have been thinking about is the kind of, when Gramsci and Gandhi were around, they were very preoccupied with the issue of nationalism and the nation. But now we are in a stage where we have tribal formations. We have tribalism in India. We have tribalism in the United States. There is a book I have here. It's called "The Time of the Tribes," written by Mitchell Mevusoli, a sociologist. I think it's very interesting. We are in a situation where people are not talking about nationalism and nations and something like that, but they are talking about within the nation. For example, there are studies that show Americans they actually hate more each other than they hate Russia and communism. The Indians they have actually very serious internal national conflicts than actually having a conflict with China, for example. So you have this kind of local national fragmentations, which probably was not present at the time of Gandhi. Gandhi was probably fighting for global humanity, but at the same time, he was an Indian and he was interested in Indian cohesion and national development. But now the Indians, 1 billion people, they have actually some kind of tribal internal conflicts, which normally is actually said this in Africa and Middle East, but we are seeing in India, we are seeing in America, and I think that is a very serious problem. One final comment, which is the issue of workers. I'm in Denmark, where they have a social democrat government, a social democratic system, welfare system, but the system here is actually not social. I mean, it's not also democratic. There are a lot of things that are happening where you have workers mobilization, but these workers mobilization, they are mobilized against the immigrants and people who are at the bottom of the society who are suffering. So there are a lot of contradictions that are, I don't know whether it is we can exactly use all theories. That is the comments I want to make, but it is very brief. I appreciate the gathering and thanks for the distinguished professors.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Now I would like to invite Dr. Gonges Bhattacharya. I request respected participant to kindly be brief. Gonges Bhattacharya, Dr. Gonges Bhattacharya. Or Jairam, somebody who raised question in the chat box. M. Jairam. Okay. Professor Anand Giri, have you noted the question? Would you like to respond?
Yes, very briefly, and then my dear friend Saji can have a little more time.
Yes, yes.
So, and I am simultaneously attentive to another where I have to speak. So, beautiful question, deep question. Yes. So, anarchy, and Gandhi really embodied anarchy, and it was not just philosophical anarchism as a way of life, and therefore that to understand that the conventional understanding of anarchism can be a kind of elusive, because when we hear the term anarchism, already something is associated, it is violence, there is no respect for rule of law. No. Gandhi had a deep respect for rule of law, and but also his inner rule, so that enabled him to break law. So therefore anarchy, and that anarchy is political anarchy in the sense that it is reorganization of state, and therefore anarchy in the state that going beyond state, and therefore the village community, Swaraj and Saharaj. And to understand that, we also have to link not only to Tolstoy, but Peter Kropotkin. Peter Kropotkin. And I do not know whether there was dialogue between Peter Kropotkin and Gandhi, because the idea of bread labor from Kropotkin, and and non-violence and cooperative evolution, cooperation. And the other thought from my dear friend Osman, thank you so much. Yes, and, and that kind of self-imprisonment we are. And, but even if we are imprisoned, our ideas do fly, and the ideas move across and beyond the prisons. And as I was referring to Father Stan Swami, you might have heard about him, the great, another Gandhi. He was killed and he died in the prison. But now, so therefore, the whole idea of organic intellectual today, very beautiful question. And we can think of organic intellectual today by bringing other contemporary thinkers like Bruno Latour, who is talking about a network, and Donna Haraway, who is talking about cyborg. So therefore, human beings, machines, and other species. So we are invited to envision and practice another modality of organic intellectual, where the limits of organism also, because some of these organistic conceptions, it led to tribalism, this blood, soil, and everything. So kind of open up, be organic, but also free ourselves for the killing, closure of the organic, and to think of organic as part of what I would like to call as a cyborg and cosmic intellectual. Organic, cyber, social, and cosmic intellectual, and relating to contemporary thinkers like Latour and Haraway. And in terms of Gandhi's non-violence, scholars like Judith Butler, who is talking about force of non-violence. So this is my offering, and
Yes, yes. Thank you so much, sir. I think some noise are coming from your side. Thank you so much. Now it is clear. Yes, it's okay. It's okay. I request respected participant, if you have any queries, you can ask. Or
maybe,
now I would like to
maybe
invite
Saji might like to share
Saji.
some thoughts.
Yes, yes. Dr. Saji Verghese, please, sir. I think Dr. Saji sir is taking some time. I invite Miniti Pradhan.
Yeah.
Please. Yes.
So good evening, everyone. And thank you, everyone, for the excellent and deep, enlightening presentation. My question is for Ananta Bhai, actually. How do you connect both ideology and persuasion together? Like, ideology is something, no, if people like, they will follow. And you cannot persuade people to follow that. I mean, in that point, how do you make people persuade to follow the ideology? Actually, the knowledge overloaded, it was very, in short period of time, it was very difficult to grasp and a lot of things to ponder over. So only this simple question I'm asking today. And if time is there at the end, I would like to read some related poetry if time is there. So Ananta Bhai, please, you can. Thank you.
So thank you, Minati. Now, ideology, what is ideology? Ideology has different dimensions. One is a set of doctrines, but ideology is also following an idea. Like, for example, Karl Marx, who talked about communism, but in his own life, he lived with very little. For example, when you read his life, and that is a very interesting romantic element, he was engagement with a very wealthy girl. And but when he got married, and his lady love waited till Marx was to ready, and then Marx, the little money he had, Marx should save his for his wife, so that when his wife comes back home, so he does not feel that her husband is a poor person. The point is that if you look at communist movement also, the freedom struggle, or Gandhian or Sri Aurobindo, any ideas that people have, some of them try to live their life. Therefore, exemplary, being an example, is a way of living an ideal, and living an ideal is part of ideology as a space. And when we live an ideal, that becomes a journey of persuasion. So persuasion happens through speech as well as through action. And thank you. From now onwards, I would be speaking in another session,
Yes.
and I would be listening to you. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much, sir. I think, Sir Dr. Verghese, I think he has left. So, any other person who ask any question, respected participant? So we are also running out of the time. So I think Miniti Pradhan, please recite your poem.
Yeah, I've kept it ready. Actually, this is the poem about the migratory laborers who go to Gulf countries for their livelihood, and what happens there. So that is only, it will take hardly half minute to 1 minute. The name of the poem, the title of the poem is Crisis. This is also from my book, New Dawn. So Crisis. Life. Life hangs between the death and door. Among many a gun sound. To feed the hungry stomach, who cares for the wound? In search of life, happiness, and more. It gifts at the end of sorrow and despair, turning the smiling eyes ever moist. The praying lips silent in scary thoughts. Alas, history is written in golden letters, all in the glory of the sick. Gloomy, invisible bloodstains in every brick. The deafening howlings of orphans, widows, lifeless faces with dry eyes of old parents. When the life will be fair to all, just to fulfill the basic needs will be the goal. Irreplaceable voids can be avoided. No compensation, more humanity, and the lives can be saved. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for a very, very, very deep poem. Yes, Ganlugini, would you like to say something? Oh, you just clapped. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Because we are running out of the time, Dr. Devendra sir, are you ready?
Yes, I'm there.
Okay. Before Dr. Devendra sir, I'm taking 2 or 3 minutes time in order to give some insight. I also find a kind of differentiation between Gandhi and Gramsci. The only different, I think, is that Gandhi attempted to teach by example, by practical method, but made also mistakes. Gramsci concept of hegemony depends on education, the education of educators. And there the ideology is very important. Ideology becomes more important in this context. And it seems to me that education is rightly absent in Hindu and Muslim world, which is why they are fought and fight. There is no modus vivendi. The religious indoctrination is so total, so absolute, uh, claimed sense of reality, that real education is in authoritative sense of hegemony is lacking. Instead, socializing is brainwashing. This is also true in the Western form of fundamentalism, be it Protestant or Catholic. Gramsci was against this, but Gandhi only addressed it in a very limited way, which was not understood. After his assassination, his world broke down into a massive violence. Even at the time of independence, he was in some area of Bengal. You know, Today, only state violence keeps it in check. So, are the educators educated or brainwashed? This is the question. I think we'll carry of this discussion, the dialogue between Gandhi and Gramsci in further dialogue also. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Devendra sir. Please give a kind of brief observation and then after vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, sir, for giving me this opportunity. Yes, I have few observations, and particularly those observations belong to the deliberations from our respected Professor Anand Kumar Giri, sir. I have been listening very attentively, and the first observation which I noted down is, sir, while delivering his ideas, presented one statement, and he extended that statement also of Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak. Can subaltern speak, and can subaltern meditate, and can subaltern pray? Yeah, definitely. If there is such society or such kind of central power which does not allow its audience, its members to express their ideas, so of course their voice remains hidden, their voice remains suppressed. And a similar analogy has very beautifully been presented by George Orwell in one of his very famous novel, 1984. In 1984, the concept of Big Brother's thought police has been presented, and the total control has been done by the dictator of the time. So, of course, for a democratic government, for having a hope to establish a democratic society, so of course, subaltern can speak, but there should be a freedom given. Another observation from Anand Kumar Giri sir's presentation I have, that is, sir said, particularly in his concluding lines when sir was moderating the session, sir raised a point about Mahabharata, the cause of Mahabharata. Of course, mistreatment, misbehavior with Draupadi is one of the cause, but sir raised the issue of Khandov Ban. And in that episode, thousands of, or entire clan of Naga was killed by Arjuna. So, sir said that very few literature is available, but few which is available, I would like to point out. Its reference has been mentioned by Rasmi Rathi, which was written from the perspective of marginalized characters of Mahabharata. And Rasmi Rathi centralizes the point of view of Karna. And of course, Karna is nowhere less than Arjuna. And when that the fight of Mahabharata was going on, so one survivor, one member from that Naga family who managed to survive, or he by chance survived, Aswashen. His mythology is there. Aswashen, one of the member of Naga family, he was alive and he was ready to take revenge for whatever mishappened with his family. So he contacted with Karna and he requested Karna ki, although I'm not that much competent enough to have a face-to-face battle with Arjuna, but anyhow, if I manage to reach near him, I will take the revenge, and the whole battle of Mahabharata will be winded up within with that episode. So actually, that conversation goes on for a long time, and because of pride Karna was having about his competence, he did not allow Aswasena to sit on his arrow and reach to the Arjuna. But that reference about Khandavana and Naga is available in Indian literature. So this has been my observation. And another thing, Gandhian ideology about removal of unequal treatment. Sir said that according to Gandhiji, casteism can be eradicated by intercaste marriage. Of course, if all the people of the society will be given equal opportunity to mingle with each other, so many ditches can be eradicated. Its reference is available in Mulk Raj Ananda's famous novel Untouchable, and its protagonist Bakha. He has been mistreated by the upper class society, upper class people of his contemporary society, and he now finally he decides ki, okay, if my conditions are not going to be improved being a Hindu, I'll convert into Christian. I'll adopt Christianity. So one of the officer of British Army suggested him, your condition will be improved in coming days, and one hope of surviving with a better future he got to know from one of the address of Gandhiji, where Gandhiji addressed these untouchables, the lowest the people belonging to lowest caste, with the name Harijana, men of God. So of course Gandhiji raised a hope for those people who are at the margin in Hindu community. So this has been my observation, sir. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Yes, thank you.
So next,
please
okay.
give a vote of thanks.
Okay.
Then we'll end the ceremony.
So thank you very much, sir, for inviting me to extend the vote of thanks for today's dialogue. And the words are limited, and words are not sufficient to convey the sense of gratitude up to the level which our honorable distinguished speakers of today have contributed in form of making this program a grand success. I must say it was one of the greatest talk in series of our regular discussion. So, sir, I would like to extend this vote of thanks on behalf of School of Humanities, Rafflles University, Neemrana, and Vishwanidham Swadhyaya Chakra for Co-Learning, and Raise Global Foundation. I, Dr. Devendra Kumar Tiwari, would like to extend my deep felt gratitude and vote of thanks to each one of you from bottom of my heart. And I would like to take this opportunity to express my gratitude to Professor Anand Kumar Giri sir, the moderator of today's session, and for his brilliant moderation and presentation of very relevant ideas. Next, I would like to express my vote of thanks to Professor Randhir Gautam, the convener of today's session, for initiation, execution, and asking very insightful questions. My heart bow in gratitude for Professor Anand Kumar of JNU, who made a brilliant presentation, very relevant to the topic of the talk. And it was full of information and very energetic presentation it was. And for that, I would like to express my deep felt gratitude to his good self. Next, I would like to express my vote of thanks to Professor Ajit Kumar Pandey, sir from BHU, for his brilliant presentation, which was very much apt to the topic of the webinar. Our next distinguished speaker, Professor Saji Verghese, was mind-blowing, and he continued like a river flowing, and it was brilliant. So I would like to express my deep felt gratitude to Dr. Saji Verghese also. To our active participants, I would like to name few, particularly Dr. Gian Louis sir, for his active participation and raising his point of view. It was commendable. I would also like to appreciate Mr. Abdul Qadir Usman Farah for his brilliant question and compliment, very relevant to the topic of the discussion. And how can I forget Minati Pradhanji for her apt question and recitation of a very beautiful poem. I would also like to express my sincere thanks and gratitude to Dr. Revered Justice Meena Vigombar, the Chief Patron of School of Law, Rafflles University, Neemrana, for her constant support and being the source of inspiration. I would also like to express my deep felt gratitude to Professor Diwakar Goli, the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Rafflles University. I would also like to express my deep felt gratitude, and I bow my head in sincere obligation to Ms. Deepika Dave, the CEO of Raise Global Foundation, for being a source of motivation and inspiration for conduction of such kind of activities. Last but not the least, from bottom of my heart, I express my deep felt gratitude to each one of you for your patience and cooperation and being very active. So thank you very much, each one of you. Once again, have a nice day. Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you so much. Thank you, respected participants and all the speakers. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.